I gave the title to my presentations last week because I thought I didn't want to speak about KPIs and those naughty things, and wanted to speak about tangential views, but from what we heard in the last 2 days, I feel like more mainstream than anything else, so which is a good thing in a way. A quick word concerning DARIAH. We heard about big data yesterday as an introduction. I would say DARIAH is about smart data. It's about researchers looking at sources in all types of domains, history, geography, linguistics as well, epigraphy, what have you. And each piece of data is something essential for the researcher, documenting the data, identifying the source. I'm not going to speak about fake news here, but you see the role of humanities in checking sources in this respect, making sure that he has the skills to transcribe, enrich, identify the important component in such an object, in that case the entry in a diary of someone working in Berlin during the Second World War. You need to know who she's referring to in her diary, and then to identify how much of this content can be republished, reused outside. So this is really this notion of highly smart data, if I may emphasize this, that is bread and butter of DARIAH. We've got 17 partners in DARIAH, and we've been NERIC in August 2014. I feel obliged to say so because everyone has given numbers so far concerning this, and yes, we are an landmark as well. This notion of smart data impacts on, I would say, the work program of our infrastructure, because of course we do have to deliver some technical components in the data workflow, from handwriting recognition to whatever kind of data mining components. But the importance of training, which you've stressed as well, I'll come back to that, is an essential aspect. And of course, the notion of good practices and standards are there to accompany the researchers towards this digital transition. We always speak about digital humanities. My aim is that digital humanities is disappearing within 10 years, so that all communities within the humanities are actually going digital in a way or another. I wanted to focus on the topic of impact under 3 angles: impact on research communities, impact on research policies, and then impact on national capacities, because as ERICS, by construction, we are a consortium of members, of countries, with the corresponding heterogeneity you could think of. Impacting on research, training. This is really essential to bring researchers who have sometimes no knowledge or very little knowledge beyond Microsoft Word of the potentiality of tools, but then they get from archives, from museums, digitized content, and they have to deal with it and understand better what they're doing. I think, Klaus said this morning, digital methodologies enhance existing approaches. We don't want to change researchers in such a way that they do something else. Historians remain with their methodologies in history, but they have to adapt to the digital content. To ensure this smooth transition to new methods, we need to also bring them to new descriptive possibilities. So these are steps here. And finally, probably introduce ways of asking old questions or new questions with the data. So when you introduce the concept of distant reading, information extraction, new types of visualization, of course, you go beyond what the researchers were used to be doing there. By doing that, we need also to train trainers, because the number of researchers in the humanities is so huge that we cannot reach out to them. So the notion of impact, which would be touching each researcher in the humanities, is not achievable, but creating some kind of ambassadors within the community through training, this is also very important for us. Just to mention the last point, this is something also that Klaus, you could have mentioned also in Germany, because in the last 10 years we've seen a lot of new professor positions being labeled as DH. I think this has been part of the movement. We see that in many countries, and in France recently, I mean last year there were at least 4 or 5 professor positions dedicated to digital humanities, and this is an evolution, and we need to train those persons as well. What forms can it take? We've got, I would say, a catalog of options concerning training. We jointly developed this course registry for digital curricula in Europe. through our working groups. This is something that was mentioned by Ricardo Pozzo this morning. We try to identify the needs of the communities. We have set up a lot of training events, some of them also joint events. I'm referring to this series of master classes we've had, seminars, schools, and finally, this is something very important. We use those various events to feed a record of training materials, which in turn can be used by our ambassadors, if I may say so, like I mentioned before. This is the DARIAH Teach initiative. Impacting on policy, this is also very important. I think you cannot speak about exchanging knowledge without having as an infrastructure a strong open science policy. This is being developed step by step. Of course, there are some very abstract principles and policies. Some of our partners, for instance, have developed DANS in the Netherlands, this data seal of approval. They participated to these FAIR principles that you mentioned before, and we need to explain about the benefits of open science. But more concretely, we pretty much have to give guidance concerning formats and standards, what can be done in this matter. It's a matter of policy to apply standards so that people do not reinvent their own formats. The notion of authorities, I mentioned that in following the panel this morning, making sure that we give guidance on how to ensure proper authorship to the data sets, to the tools that we distribute. The notion of license has been mentioned several times in the last 2 days. And finally, of course, we need those technical components like repositories to ensure that researchers have the capacity to be open through the infrastructures we deliver. We need to be very open in the domain of openness, so it can range from very basic aspects such as open access to publications. It's clear for everyone that the humanities are not at the forefront of the open access movement, not necessarily. I'm always referring to the statement by the American Historical Society 5 years ago, urging the students not to put the PDF of their PhD online because it would impact on the business model of the publishers, and they should keep an embargo of at least 5 years before they deliver their PDF. We need to evangelize in the basic notions of open access, but at the other side of the spectrum, we've identified the need, for instance, to fluidify the relation between researchers and cultural heritage institutions, and we've been developing, again, together with Clarin, but also European Archival Portal Europe, this data reuse charter with a series of principles that we've agreed on which we are starting to elaborate through workshops now, which are very close to the actual needs of the researchers. Finally, impacting on members, checking my time here and going quick, it has to do with the notion of institutional change that we've heard this morning, and reflecting on the last 12 years. I would say, even if we had nothing technical, nothing in the domain of policies of mentions, over the 12 years I've seen in a lot of countries how national programs developed in relation to the participation of the corresponding country to DARIAH. We said we would need some narratives. My best example is my meeting with Ivan Tazovac, the then Ministry of Culture in Belgrade, and about which my kid said, now you will never say anything about my haircut, so do Google Ivan Tazovac, you know why I refer to the haircut. And he said, look, I mean, I'm in a situation that was 6-7 years ago, where my National Archive knows nothing about digital methods, my National Library is a mess, and I've got a couple of institutions I would like to go digital. I'm going to DARIAH in order to just exchange with the others and make sure that the whole process of digitization I want to act in my own country reflects what's going on in the other countries. And for me, this is a major notion of political impact here. Conversely, I think it's very important, and we've discussed a lot this concept of marketplace a little bit among ourselves. It's important that we take the best of the jewels existing in the various countries and redistribute towards the other countries. This is the main role of an infrastructure like DARIAH as a hub. It has to do with data sets, it has to do with tools, it has to do with quite a few objects with a lot of issues before we are that far. Of course, issues like multilingualism concerning documentation and so on. The issue of community recognition, that is something being done nationally. We want to make sure that they expect being recognized at European level, issues of maintenance. So there is a little combination of politics with infrastructural support that we are trying to ensure through the development of what we call the DARIAH marketplace, but I guess we'll drop the DARIAH before long because we need to have an SSH marketplace among us at some point. I'm not going to elaborate on this here. The idea is really to provide a user-centric information concerning existing tools, existing methods, down to the description of algorithms there. As a conclusion, I would say basically none of the things I've said are specific to DARIAH at a certain level of concept, and I think we should probably try to work together more on identifying how we can have some joint policies, how we can have some joint impacts towards the countries and work together with the national ministries in particular. And as a word of conclusion, I would say, I don't care whether we have an impact as research infrastructures. I think our aim is to make sure that researchers themselves have an impact when they work with us, and that they can have an impact on society as a consequence. Thank you.
Thank you.